Okay, wonderful. All right, thank you everyone for joining us for this leadership panel today. As I mentioned in my earlier session, we have senior leaders from our supply chain industry from different sponsor companies here, giving us their time and their insights, their knowledge, imparting their knowledge and best practices so we can learn from them and be better at how we manage D&I in our space, in our organization, as well as in our personal life. And to support that, we have Dana Stifler from Gartner, who will be the moderator, and she will help us with the panel and take us through the session. So Dana, she is a she's a vice president of research and covering supply chain talent strategies and the chief supply chain officer role, as well as supply chain university programs. She launched and led the supply chain strategy and enablers team and has been responsible for the launch and leadership of the supply chain program. The Gartner Awesome Women in Supply Chain Survey and new Gartner ASCM Supply Chain Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Project in March 2021. We are so thrilled, Dana, to have you here. Thank you for your time and designing and supporting this panel. So please take it away.
Sure, Reki, and thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining. So welcome to our Day 2 Discover Executive Panel. And we have 4 top executives joining us from 4 top organizations today. And they are going to share some of their insights and experiences on how allyship, or inclusion in action, I would say, drives better diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging outcomes. So our agenda for today is that, first of all, because I'm from Gartner, of course, I have to share with you what I think is some really great foundational research that we do in partnership with the Association for Supply Chain Management, show you some data that we have on pipelines and inclusion initiatives in organizations, and we'll link that to the inclusion discussion today. And then I will introduce you to our esteemed panelists, and we have 3 main areas that we're going to address. Number 1 is personal reflections on allyship. Number 2 is allyship's role in talent development strategies and also in leadership. Number 3, allyship for individuals, advice for individuals. And toward the end of the session, we'll hear from each panelist with some parting words and thoughts. So the goal for today is, whether you are seeking stronger allies or you're trying to learn how to be a more effective ally, or both, in many cases, you'll take something and be able to use something from this session. So let me go ahead and jump in with some foundational data from Gartner. Okay, Zoom is not my best platform, so let's see how I do here. All right. Let me get this into slide mode. All right, so we did what will be an annual project with ASCM at the beginning of this year. So we're about to launch into our 2022 cycle with that group, but we thought it was really important, after we'd done quite a few years of women in supply chain research, which we continue to do, that we should listen to our clients and listen to the supply chain community and get some similar data on other dimensions of diversity in supply chain organizations. And so that's what we did. We went out to supply chain organizations, approximately 300 organizations in the US, Canada, and Europe, to ask them what were they emphasizing in their DEI strategies, and what was the state of their organization at that moment in terms of representation, and what initiatives were they pursuing. So I just wanted to show you how that lined up for 2021 anyway, you can see that ethnicity and race and gender are the top two dimensions and focus area. That has been true for quite some time. And I think there are differences by industry sector and sometimes by region that we see on relative emphasis. So the gender focus in supply chain organizations, when I talk to chief supply chain officers, for example, is fairly universal. But the focus on ethnicity and race as a dimension is strongest in the US and in Canada, and seemingly less of an emphasis in European headquartered supply chain organizations. But you see that we have a number of dimensions here. Some are visible, some are not visible. And there is in global, so Fortune 500 companies, for example, we see a higher propensity, especially for US headquartered companies, to focus on multiple dimensions here. And including some of the less visible ones, and particularly physical ability and cognitive ability are focus areas for supply chain organizations in the US and Canada. I would say physical ability in the Americas more broadly, including Latin America, but unfortunately the survey didn't include Latin American operations. I do want to draw your attention to the 1 in 5 responding organizations that said they don't really emphasize any dimension necessarily. And so that's an important thing to remember, is that not all supply chain organizations are aware of or are focusing on some of these issues. So let me share with you what we found in terms of representation for people of color in full-time supply chain professional roles. So that's an important distinction for this research. We have not captured frontline and or hourly representation, which I think would look quite different. And so I think we have an opportunity with this project being an annual undertaking to improve this research and to go and get that data as well, and look at that population, including the supervisory up into management population for that, so that we can complement our view on salaried supply chain positions. So what you're looking at here is the supply chain organization overall and the proportion of people of color in those supply chain organizations. And the definitions that we used for people of color was a combination of US, Canadian, and European demographic categories for underrepresented or protected people. If you're wondering how we what our definitions were there, we tried to put our best foot forward to get kind of a general definition across some of these geographies. And you see the pipeline that is not probably very surprising to some of you, especially those of you who have gathered this data for your own organizations. But we see especially a super steep drop off between the total full-time employees and this frontline manager supervisory position first opportunity. It is a much steeper drop than we see in the women in supply chain pipeline, for example. And we know that if we miss the opportunity at that level, that affects everything that comes after it. So you see kind of just after that, we have an anemic pipeline all the way through. I did want to show you the difference between, we say, large global organizations or organizations that are 5 billion plus in annual revenue are where people of color are better represented than medium-sized to small supply chain organizations. And I'm sure that you're thinking there are probably a number of reasons why that might be the case. So one might be resources or focus on this. And so that's what a lot of time people tell us about Gartner and how we promote certain supply chain organizations as leaders and pioneers and innovators, or particularly strong on diversity, equity, and inclusion, you'd say to yourself, well, of course they're leaders. They have really large supply chain centers of excellence and people working on these issues in supply chain that a medium-sized or smaller company might have. So that might be one reason. Other reasons are, I think, that they do have more stakeholders paying attention to these things, notably institutional investors and large numbers of employees, as well as candidates for employment. And I think we've seen, especially in supply chain over the last 5 years, that this war for talent predates the pandemic. And we know, for example, that millennial and Gen Z, supply chain professionals really value working in diverse and inclusive teams. It's an important attractor and retainer. And so we see that, the largest supply chain organizations are feeling the most pain in terms of their ability to attract and retain people. And so they've put more resource and more formal goals and objectives into this. Okay, let's look at a couple more things here. I did want to show you women of color as well in our data sets coming out of our annual Women in Supply Chain survey that we do in partnership with Awesome, which is a group focused on director level and above female leaders in supply chain. So we captured this data in 2021 to look at women of color in this particular data set, and were again, not surprised, but still disappointed to see some of these numbers. When we look at individual companies and supply chain organizations, this representation may look vastly different, but what you are looking at is really an average. And so what was interesting in 2021 was when we asked people, well, what initiatives are you pursuing to get better representation, to have more equitable employee experiences? The majority of respondents told us that they do also track women of color within some of their initiatives, which we were glad to hear, but we need to go back and do more qualitative digging to find out kind of how this in particular is supported in certain supply chain initiatives for diversity, equity, and inclusion. The last thing I wanted to share with you as foundational, and thank you, Yanni, for suggesting this, it was a really good suggestion, is thinking about some of our approaches, and even as we get more into our specific discussion of allyship, what different approaches and in what different environments could our allyship activities be most successful? And so what you're looking at here is some deep research by Gartner's HR research arm that shows you which types of initiatives and projects for which demographics lead to the best attraction, retention, and performance outcomes. And so you can see that they're a little bit different for different groups. And you can think also that, of course, there are intersections of all of these groups too, right? But I think what I would like you to take away from this is, in addition to the allyship that you practice on a daily basis in how you behave and you operate, these formal structures and projects would, in addition to that, ensure that you get a better and more inclusive result. I did also want to kind of in this era of looking at the future of work and hybrid work, point out how important flexible scheduling is. The bold means most successful. If you were wondering what the bold refers to, it's that those initiatives are most successful. So that is the foundation that I wanted to lay here before I now introduce our panelists. And I did want to kick off the introduction with coming out of this Gartner research, just a definition. It's a very basic definition, and I know that your definition of allyship may vary from this one, and our panelists' definition might as well. but the definition at Gartner of allies is more about what allies do. So we say that allies leverage their positions of privilege or advantage to build and support inclusive environments and advance members of underrepresented groups. So it was suggested to me by the panelists that I kick off with that, and then that we get into the discussion. So with that, I will stop my share and look at everyone's smiling faces, which is great to see everybody. And I'd like to introduce you one by one, starting with you, Nancy. Nancy Barber, PhD. She's Senior Vice President of Product Development at Bristol Myers Squibb. Welcome, Nancy. Can you say hello so we know we can hear you?
Hello, everybody. Great to be here.
Thanks, Nancy. And then we have Yanni Dewberry. He's Senior Vice President and Chief Supply Chain Officer at Land O'Lakes. Hi, Yanni.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Yanni. And then we have Jason Ryman, who is also a Senior Vice President and also a Chief Supply Chain Officer, but at the Hershey Company. Welcome, Jason.
Hello, everyone.
And then finally, Kathy Wengel, who is Executive Vice President and Chief Global Supply Chain Officer. Sorry, Kathy, at Johnson & Johnson. So welcome, Kathy. We're really happy to have you all here with us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you so much. So yeah, so let's get the discussion started. I'm going to start with you, Kathy, and ask you about how allies have affected you personally over the course of your career.
Thank you, Dana. And again, it is wonderful to be here with everyone and talk about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, because indeed allies, mentors, sponsors, the broadest definition, the narrowest definition have really made a huge difference in my career. And I'm a huge believer in that what we do every minute of every day is part of that process. And if I think through, moments in my career, allies help me look at opportunities, look at challenges in new ways, help me break out of my own cultural mindset, and encouraging me to think bigger, to think bolder, to think about opportunities that often had a lot of unknowns. And some of the most impactful ones for me were as I've moved to different countries. I've been at Johnson & Johnson more than 30 years. And as I moved to different countries, that's a big experience. You're leaving your family, your culture, all those things, behind, but you never leave them behind. They're part of you. And so building allies, keeping allies in old and new locations, they really made a big difference in shaping my leadership style. And a big part of that is my DE&I philosophy. And it also shaped, my personal life. My husband is not from the US. He didn't speak a word of English when we met. He still doesn't speak much. And so that evolution of, one ally, one person who said, have you ever thought of moving somewhere else? It completely changed that trajectory of my life inside and outside of work.
Thanks, Kathy, so much. I did want to give panelists opportunities to speak up on that question as well, briefly, if anyone else had an ally that an allyship experience that affected them. Okay, so I think we'll move on. So maybe shifting over then to the view for executives as allies, right? So Jason, could I ask you how you view yourself as an ally, or how you've acted as an ally for others?
Yeah, first off, I know we have supply chain professionals, on the call here. So I just want to send out a huge thank you to everything that everyone's doing. I know this is a tough time for supply chains. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. Here at Hershey, we're about making more moments of goodness. It's part of the fun and the products that we bring to market. It's part of what I love about, working, for the company. And that's really part of our foundational beliefs in, what we do. As we look at allyship and being an ally, it's about making sure that we get diverse voices and perspectives. And we think that helps solve some of our business solutions. We're very proud of the work that we do here. One of the things that we're most proud of is eliminating things like the pay gap, both from a gender and people of color. We've eliminated those pay gaps that tend to exist, in companies. So we've been an advocate and an ally from that perspective. From the things that we do a lot of listening to our employees. What are they saying? Where do they see the needs? One of the things that we heard, especially from our employees and people of color, are that they don't feel like they have a voice around career development or getting really good feedback. And one of the things that we've done here is we have these pods, and they're mentoring pods. It's like partnering on development. And it's really focused on making sure that we get entry level as well as early level managers, in rooms, and there are themes, and the themes, can be about how do I accelerate my career? How do I balance, work and life? I personally mentor, 10 of our team members, in those pods. We get to, learn from each other in that process. So it's not only a process of me talking to them about how am I thinking about, the strategy of the company and how we're looking at supply chain, but also for them to give me feedback on, where do they see the opportunities, and for me to connect, at that level in the organization. And like I tell, everyone in our supply chain organization, if you ever want to sit down from a career development standpoint, I will take 30 minutes. If it's at the beginning of the day, if it's at the, lunchtime, I'll buy you lunch. If that's at the end of the day, I will find out how to make 30 minutes out of my schedule, because I personally believe that us as leaders and investing in people's career is an important part around, how people develop.
Absolutely. And I have noticed over the, I guess it's 10 years now or so, following some of your work, all of you as chief supply chain officers, on average, this group spends more than average time on some of these career development, career pathing conversations. So senior leadership at some of these companies that are here with me today are spending relatively more time on that. And I think, it helps you perform better, right? It also makes you a destination for more supply chain professionals. So thank you, Jason, for that. So if we think about allyship, and you've talked about some formal things, Jason, that the Hershey company is doing. How important is this to embed in your talent development strategy? And could you even say a bit more about how it might be an explicit expectation of your senior leadership teams? Could I have you go ahead, Kathy, and then we'll go to Nancy. Thank you.
Sure. So allyship, it is first and foremost, I think, starts at the top of the company and how we set our company culture, our goals, our expectations. So it's very important to talent development, but it's also important that it's part of an ecosystem that is working to continuously build out the kind of diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture that you want in your company and that you want in the group of partners. So if I use the example of J&J, it starts with our company values, our credo. It starts with setting long-term and clear goals that we publicly commit to. We call them our Health for Humanity goals, and those are across the ESG, framework. But when we talk specifically about diversity, equity, inclusion, and therefore the role of leaders, it's about having publicly pacing goals, for example, around supplier diversity, around health equity, around the mix inside our company, and the goal of being 50-50 and female, of the continued significant increase in African American and Hispanics as part of our internal team, as well as our ecosystem. And from there, then you cascade that into your talent development strategy. You cascade that into the role that every one of us has as a senior leader to be accountable for that, into the culture we build, and then into, to the point Jason made, the transparency, the ability for everyone's voice to matter. And therefore you build a fabric of allies that are each moving the company and the culture, and each of us as individual talent, right, on that career trajectory we want to see.
Thanks, Kathy. Nancy, I know that your organization is a little bit different from the other senior leaders here, but would love to hear your views on those questions.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. Yeah, for everyone. So I lead a kind of scientific and engineering focus group that eventually feeds our supply chain. So a couple of things about talent development. So, you know, there's a component of, I think, because of the need to we hire and develop often areas of very, very deep technical scientific expertise. So people grow deeply, not necessarily broadly, and the value of the diverse expertise is critically important. But also, yeah, I've seen an evolution in the industry. I've been in this industry for 30 years. And the heavy reliance in some of these areas on your own personal network when hiring, and the value you see in people like yourself, and it goes across demographics. I have my favorite schools that I like to go to, or I have my expectations on a certain level of expertise, or things that people must know based on, I know it must be useful. I want to make sure I surround myself with people with people who know and value what I know. And however, the criticality of building diversity and the value that it brings in particular to innovation, that diversity of thought, that diversity of background and experience comes from all of those under the surface attributes that we don't necessarily see or measure, but really are reflected in the behaviors as we recruit and as we develop people. Specifically in the allyship piece. So as a woman who came into the industry in the kind of the hardcore physical sciences, I had many experiences being the only woman in the room, being the first woman leader in this particular role, and many other of those experiences. And benefited from training programs and development programs that helped me understand the ecosystem that I was working in. And 20 years ago, a lot of those talent development courses were around, I often say, fixing the diverse employees, giving them the tools, and oftentimes it's learning how to operate and adapt in the kind of the baseline world in which we were operating. And at a point, it's helpful to say, how do I adapt my behaviors? How do I operate differently and understand the implications of things that are seen as typically female behaviors and translate them into a male-dominated world. But after a certain point, I remember at one point I was like, I want to stop fixing people, but I want to fix the system. And so this is where allyship becomes really critically important. It's not about expecting the underrepresented group to adapt and do all the changing. It's about the ecosystem needs to change. And this is where allyship is absolutely critically important in the talent development, is how are your hiring managers, your senior leaders viewing what's good? What does a leader look like? What skills are necessary to be a good leader, both in the again, in my world, very scientific, technical focus versus the actual specific behaviors that leaders need to have to create an inclusive environment, to create a diverse team, and get the benefit that comes from all those diverse perspectives. So I'm a very strong proponent of making sure you're driving the culture in the organization, because really those behaviors, as Kathy mentioned, are what you do is what people notice. And it's critically important that everyone in the organization can look around and say, I have equal opportunities. My managers, my leaders value what I do, and are giving me the opportunities to do that.
Thanks, Nancy. So moving beyond kind of classic mentoring and fixing to a different dynamic. So building on that and kind of growing allies, especially amongst the executive level that's here today, how do you, with peers, right, other senior peers, how do you build or grow allies at these senior levels? Yanni, I haven't heard from you yet. Would love to hear from you on this particular one.
Sure. Thanks, Dana. I think that building allyship amongst executives is really no different than how we build allies across any spectrum of the organization. It really doesn't matter. I think you have to, look for the commonalities to start building a relationship, because it really does start with building a relationship so people can understand each other. One of the things I found throughout my career, and I've been in supply chain a long time, like most of the folks on this call, because it's why my hair is so gray at this point in time, is that people don't care what you know until they know you care. And so we really have to develop this relationship with the other executives of why it's important to care, and to talk about the inequities that exist, and how those inequities not only hurt the organization, but hurt society. Right? And talk about how we can reduce those inequities. And I often think that, because I do get this question quite often, that we are really asking the wrong question. And I look at it as a question of what prevents a person from being an ally? I think that's the real question, is what prevents people from being allies? Because that's what we have to figure out so that everyone can become an ally.
Do you have any views, or I would open that up to other panelists too, on kind of what, and I think, there's a lot more findings on this out there about kind of what are the constraints, right? Or what's stopping people? Yoni, do you have any ideas on that front with conversations you might have had?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing that stops people is that they don't understand that those inequities exist. They don't see them. And if you grow up in an environment, if you are in an environment where you are not part of that inequity, it is hard to see that inequity. And so to be able to help people see that inequity becomes really important. And that's why I say that it's really about helping people understand what that inequity is.
Yeah, Dan, if I could, I think that in some case, to build on Yanni's point about the lack of understanding, I've heard senior leaders in various circumstances not know necessarily how to address being an ally when being asked to get involved in a mentoring program. And I remember this one specific incident where a senior male leader said, "Well, I need some training. I need to understand, how do I mentor someone who's not like me?" And I thought it was very odd. The point of mentoring and sponsorship is it's not like you're trying to train somebody, but you're trying to give them information, clarity, access. And very often one of the challenges that people need is it's about access to senior leaders. It's about access to broader components across the industry. And I tried to explain to this person, it's like they need exactly what you're doing for anybody else. You don't need to do anything different when you're mentoring someone different from you. I think there's also a component of learning from the people that you're mentoring or sponsoring. It's not a one-way street, and sometimes I think there is this view of not knowing the role, what they could possibly do, and so it's easier to kind of step back and not get involved because they don't necessarily understand what exactly to do.
I would just add on there, I think, one of the things that our team has done very well, and Alicia, who gave the closing comments yesterday, has been leading some of these initiatives, is really making sure that you're having real and tough conversations. And we've done that, through some of our town halls. There's learning. Listen, I don't know everything, and I can learn more from hearing, other and different perspectives. And being vulnerable and open to that is key. Some of the training that is focus is bringing this to life in real examples, and some of it gets into like the studies of, hey, if the name on a resume is different, but everything else is the same, and people are selecting it out because of the name, then you you have issues that exist that are more systemic. And, how do you bring some of those real life, things that are tangible that people can say, I can connect with that. And I think our team has done a great job of bringing that to life in some of the training that we've done for all our people.
I think that can be really valuable, that those resources. It does seem to me too that that could address, these courageous conversations that a lot of companies have structured more formally over the last year and a half. I think are helping. I think one of the constraints I see sometimes is that, especially when you're the executive, you're supposed to have all of the answers, right? And some of these conversations, you're really operating from a position of sometimes ignorance, and that's not really a typical professionally rewarding stance to be taking, especially in supply chain. So I think that can be challenging too. But I've seen many clients and leaders in our research kind of work through that in recent years, which is really gratifying to see. Kind of related to that, we're talking about executives, but I know, Yanni, you said, well, kind of it's all the same. It's executives' role in allyship or frontline or mid-level managers. I'm wondering, is there anything different that, Yanni, that you would say or other panelists would say about what might be different for mid-level and frontline managers who are they're trying to develop themselves, they're risk averse, most likely. Any thoughts on how it might look different, or have you seen any in your organization, anyone do well at some of these levels, perhaps?
I do think there is some difference as you talk about organizational levels, because I think your point, Dana, about people who are trying to make it, through the organizations, up the organizations, tend to be a little less risk averse. And so being able to go out on a limb and do something that is different than they're used to is going to be hard, right? So I think from that perspective, it is different. But once again, I think the perspective we might want to look at is allyship a work thing or is it a societal thing? Because if it's a societal thing, then there's absolutely no difference, no matter where you are in the organization. Because every person has the opportunity to help the unrepresented every day, every place. And it is easier in an organization. I think your research actually shows that. That's why larger corporations that have more policies and principles and procedures tend to do a little better. But when you go outside of work, those policies and procedures and principles don't exist, right? And so the opportunity for me, and when I talk to folks, is really outside of the organization. Is how do you carry that outside of the organization in the little microaggressions that we see every day and we figure out how to deal with, right? Things like when you're walking down the street with a friend of yours and they clutch your purse because the person of color comes by. Do you say anything? What do you do? Or you hear something, and this one really just irks me every time I hear it. You're a credit to your race. It's like, what did you expect my race to be like, right? And so how we confront and address those things outside of work, to me, are way more important than how we address them inside of work.
Right, where everything's prescribed, especially for some of these larger companies that we work for. Does anyone else care to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. Also, coming back to there's so many things that we assume. Coming back to a point that was made in the chat too about unconscious bias. We all come in with certain biases in our own minds and certain assumptions around things that we see in people. There's always the how do you get to know the person that you're talking about, and not the label that you're ascribing to a person, because we don't know. We talk about the visible characteristics and the not so visible characteristics. So seek to understand first. Put your presumptions and assumptions, on the side, and seek first to understand the humanity of the person. Which I think if you start from there, then it takes all of the kind of creates an environment where the individual can kind of be open to newness and open to difference, and to be open to learning.
If I could add, I think it's approaching all this with the humility and the humanity, and to do the work to understand as your own unconscious bias, because I think then you become a better listener. I think it's helped me to even consciously overcorrect when I realize this is something I might have over my life built up as an unconscious bias. And once it becomes conscious, you can do something about it. But I think in the end, it comes down to listening, and then our ability, no matter where you are in the organization, or to your point, Ani, in society, to take actions that matter. And in that moment on the sidewalk, you're making a call. Does an action, a reaction matter? Not matter. Is it something that we have to stand up and advocate for, or something we know maybe that's not where we're going to have that impact that day? We're going to have that impact somewhere else. And having everyone believe that our actions, each of our actions, accumulate over time, into that change, is a big part of what I see. If we enable those cultures, that's what then, that's what really engages people, when you can make a difference, small or large.
Yeah, I think the focus in this panel world is company specific, but that bigger picture is crucial and more important, of course. I do think, though, that people still have the question that I think that some of kind of professionally speaking, that some of the individual contributors listening, for example, some of the young people participating in Discover would be, and I've looked at this question on how do I find sponsors, right, as well as allies, right, or how can you cultivate allies, for example, which is a little different from sponsors. But any ideas on that, kind of how do you, I mean, we talked about being open as allies, but if we're kind of seeking understanding, seeking allies, any thoughts on that from anyone in the group?
I would say observe the people around you and look for behaviors that indicate allyship. How do people present themselves? Do they stand up for others? And then don't be afraid to approach them, and not necessarily wait for them to come to you, but seek
Have
them
courage.
out.
Right. I mean, one thought I had was, look for, mutual interest, or, kind of what you're passionate about, or what people are working on, or you think looks in someone who's kind of working maybe over adjacent to you, but you think that that looks interesting, might be a point of connection as well, right? Kind of shared work interest hopefully would grow into something bigger. I think, Kathy, were you going to jump in there? I thought I heard a noise.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a big advocate for, you need to look sometimes at both ends of a spectrum, right? The world's a bell curve, and it's the ends that are really interesting. And so you're pointing about, on one hand, go for the adjacency. If you're an individual contributor, become a member of an ERG that you affinitize with, and an ERG you don't, and understand how those work together. Meet and understand how your company works by following the chain of what you're doing as an individual contributor, and see where that leads you. But then look at it also from the lens of talent and leadership and allyship. Go when we all are wonderfully, we pay back more and more in the office, or always as in your plant or DC. Don't sit and have lunch with the people you always do. Go sit down to someone you've never met and begin that discussion. And I think that opens up, it is been an individual contributor role. You've got to work extra hard to build those connections. So that would be my my input.
Thanks, Kathy. That's great. Yeah, sometimes today, especially in ERGs, it's a lot more likely to have people participating in ERGs who are not the, the central dimension of that ERG, so that people are a little bit more visible than they used to be. So that can be helpful. I did want to, especially because I'm starting to detect this in our research, I noticed that that over the last year and a half, kind of the interest in and even action around diversity, equity, and inclusion was very strong. And people were very conscious of what kind of allies they were being or could be. I think, especially with all of the disruptions and challenges we have in supply chain, and even specifically with supply chain talent and labor shortages, I wanted to ask the group what you think what's important to kind of to sustain this focus as we go forward, past 2020 and 2021 into the future. I can see some of these priorities beginning to get overshadowed. So would love to hear from any of you on that.
I'd be glad to start for a minute. I think it's about building those goals and those values that matter into your leadership expectations, not only for in a current period, but over the long term. So do you have multi-year goals? Do you reward and recognize people for what they do and how they do it? We made that change in J&J, I think now about, 7 or 8 years ago. We changed our whole G&O, employee evaluation and compensation system to be 50-50 on the what and the how. Now, if you're continuously, a fabulous leader and you never deliver the business results, okay, that's not going to work over time. But same thing, you deliver the business results and no one wants to work with you, that also doesn't work over time. So are you building in, for whether it's at a company level or in the sphere of how you set your own team's goals, things that, make sure it's not just the flavor of the moment, but you can see how that's going to accumulate over time into a bigger set of changes.
Yeah, it really has to be built in, is what I hear you saying. And those are I have faith in a lot of the organizations that have done that, but there are a lot that haven't gone that far. And I think that you'll see what happens in the next year and a half. And I hope I'm wrong. But a question that I have, and then I'm going to go to each of you to wrap up with some words of wisdom. One question that I kept seeing coming up in just my outside explorations of allyship are questions about how far allies should go in their support or advocacy or action. And I know that this is a bigger question than the professional sphere, certainly, but I would, in either context, I'm wondering how far should allies go? So Jason, I think you had some things that you were working on kind of outside of supply chain, right? In terms of relationships that you were building.
Yeah, one of the things I would just start off there is, as I kind of reflect, back on, my career and as we started working on initiatives, specifically around, women's business resource group within Hershey, and then also, focus in, supply chain. When we first started, as a male, we were like, well, what role, should we play, and do they want us as part of the group? And, this is like 10, 12 years ago. And, it became very apparent that if we're going to make change, we had to be, part of that change, that, really the changes that we were looking to enact. And I think it's the same thing here, is that, we have to be part of the change, to make that happen. As I look across, the business and how do we have that impact, it's, how do you make those investments? How do you lean in and be intentional? If you're talking about, assignments or key assignments that are going on in the business, how do you, lean into people and make sure that you're selecting from a diverse group of people to get those assignments? we do the same thing when we look at, our business from a supplier standpoint, and, how do you do supplier development, and how might you work with a minority or woman-owned business to help develop them from a supplier perspective as well. So, those are some of the areas that we work on here at Hershey, and I know that these companies that are here on the call with us, a lot of them do great work in this area as well.
Thanks, Jason. Yanni, any thoughts from your end?
Yeah, when I think about that question, and I do get that question a lot, I always think that it's not really a question of how far should allies go, what should they do. It, to me, boils down to, it's how long do we want these inequities to last? I mean, I think that's the fundamental question, right? How long are we willing to live, as Dr. King says, live with two Americas, right? Because, allies, because as people of color, we are all in every day. We don't have a choice. And as long as allies don't go all the way, they're not willing to share the privileges, as your definition described, then that means the 20% have to carry the 100%. And that gets extremely difficult, right? Because, from my own experience as a person of color, I can't avoid it. I have to deal with it every day. Even on those days when I feel like I'm being suffocated, which is, it happens. And for a person of color, they'll tell you it happens. But I have two sons, so I know that I have to go in all in every day, just like my dad did and my grandfather did. So, my ask is always that for allies, start the journey, stand with me, walk with me, march with me, and help me get the same privileges you have. Because how far we should go is really a question of how long do we want to wait for equity.
Thank you for that, Yanni. And I think I would like to hear from everyone here as we round out our panel today. Thank you again, everyone. And so I am going to Nancy, Jason, Kathy, Yanni, go in that order and ask you to share something you would like the audience to take away today, starting with you, Nancy.
It's hard to follow that comment by Yanni, but maybe what I would like to add is before you do it, seek to understand as kind of one of the number one priorities as you're dealing with every individual that you're dealing with. Make no presumptions. Seek to understand each individual as a unique person.
Thank you, Nancy. Jason, over to you.
It's a very similar message. I would say, listen, be vulnerable, allow yourself, to be vulnerable and to learn and to understand that not everybody experiences things the same way. I can think, people here on this call who've influenced me in different ways that they don't even, know that they have, but, be open and vulnerable, to those new experiences.
Thanks, Jason. Kathy?
Say that every conversation, who you have in it and how you lead it matters. Every hire, who you choose, who you don't choose matters. And more importantly, every thank you, every sincere how are you doing really matters. And we each have that responsibility to make a difference, by doing those things to build that culture or that change, as he says, that we all want to see.
Thank you, Kathy. And Yanni, over to you for some last thoughts. Thank you so much.
So to all the allies on the call here and everywhere, and all the people that want to be allies, I say thank you. Allies are needed if we're going to make the change. If we're going to shorten that arc of moral justice, we're going to need allies. To all the people of color on the call, I hate to say it, but discrimination exists. And unfortunately, we still have to work harder and dig deeper. The playing field is not level today. And to everyone, that road to equity is still being paved. I personally don't know when we're going to get there, but I do know the more people that work on building it, the sooner we'll get there. So thank you.
Thank you, Yanni. So seek to understand, be open and humble. Everything matters. Welcome all allies from Yanni to potential allies and allies, and keep going, right? For everyone, because there's a lot of work to do still. So with that, I would like to thank all of you for taking this time to do the panel today, and thank everyone for attending, and hand things back over to Rocky at headquarters. Thank you, Rocky. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow.
Bye.
That was so powerful. I can't even begin to thank you enough to all you leaders for being here, Kathy, Jason, Yanni, Nancy. We all know you're extremely busy. And on behalf of all the attendees and Discover, a very big thank you to all of you for your time and your insights and learning that you imparted with us today. I know a lot of very good things were said during the panel and the conversation. I saw the chat was very engaged as well. People were taking all the information and actually engaging, which is what we wanted, start the conversation and start the drive to actually, and the passion, drive the passion to make the change. And like Yanni said, the road is getting paved and we all want to be part of it to lay one brick at a time and, get to the end state where we want to be, where it's equal opportunity for all. And it's not an afterthought, and it's how we live our lives going forward on a regular basis. So thank you so much. I know there are a few things that I did pick from the discussion that I heard that I want to just call it out again. From Nancy, how to be talk to the person, not label them, right? Which is so powerful. Be aware of your own unconscious bias, right? And talk to the person at the humane level, which was so powerful. Such a great tip. And Yanni, you mentioned about relationship building, right? That's where everything starts. If you connect, people start to understand, right? So thank you. These are something that we need to hear again and again, even though we all know them. But hearing, makes it a big difference, right? You are thinking about it, you're conscious about it, you're aware, and you can make a difference and, take some actions. So thank you about that. Jason, you asked us to be a listener, which is absolutely important, very important, no matter what level you are in your career, in your life, in your professional life, personal life, you have to be a good listener to be able to understand what other people are thinking and how we can drive change. So thank you for that. And finally, Kathy, your very powerful statement about looking at both the end of the spectrums, right? Most of the times we are so focused on just how we feel, how we connect, who we are. We forget about the other side, the other end. And to have a broad perspective and connect everything together, we have to consciously make an effort to look at both the end of the spectrum. So such great tips and advice. Thank you so much. And we are all very thankful from Discover, as well as on behalf of all the attendees. So thank you for your time. And with that, I just have one more big announcement to make, is about our raffle winners. So we have our raffle winners for today, Nefertiti Anderson and Magda Camille. I hope I said that right. So big round of applause. You will get Hershey's gift baskets. So please connect. Yes, I see Jason doing this. So thank you, Jason, for sponsoring the raffle. And please connect with Discover office for how to collect your gift. And then one last logistic housekeeping item before we leave. We will be breaking now for lunch. At lunch, we have a memory video link posted. So please, if you're interested in looking at all different pictures from all our previous Discover events, please feel free to log in and see the video. But we will reconvene at 12:30 with the Mentorship executive coaching session, where we will have the opportunity to come together again in a smaller breakout room session in a very small individual settings, where you can connect with one of the senior leaders from the industry and learn from them how to navigate your career or the challenges that you face during your career in advancement assessment, or any other tips and advice that you need, that you want to learn and hear from them, you will have that opportunity. So don't forget to join us back again at 12:30. With that, a very big thank you and a very big round of applause.